let's imagine a painter who works on houses.
Okay.
And one day while painting, he falls off his ladder and he hits his head. He suffers a brain injury that disables or like severs his thalamocortical connection. So he no longer has the capacity to deploy any sort of conscious experience. And let's say we're in the future, so we actually have the medical capacity to, restore his thalamocortical connection. Do you think that we have a medical obligation to restore his connection, or do all of our commitments to him end as soon as he loses the capacity to instantiate a mind?
I'm not sure. I would have to think about this a lot.
Yeah, so let's say I have a magic wand. If I tap somebody with it, it'll simulate all of the physical aspects of pregnancy without actually creating fetus or zygote. Would it be justified to kill that person in self-defense if that was the only way to prevent them from tapping you with the wand?
I wanted to ask you why you think the violinist argument isn't compelling.
Because it's weirder to be, I think if you wanted to make the violinist argument more analogous, at the very least, it would only be probably analogous to rape, I would say probably. Because in the violinist argument, you're literally abducted. And I think that if you bake in any kind of sexual consent here, I think the violinist hypothetical changes pretty significantly. So for instance, let's say that you go to a music hall, and outside the music hall it says, if you want to come in and enjoy this music, that's fine, but there's a 1% chance that you're going to wake up the next morning with a violinist attached to you that you have to keep alive for a while. I think people would change their view of that pretty significantly.
I hadn't thought of it that way. But I think that the root of the violinist argument is more that like your body is like that, even if the violinist has a right to life, like your body can't be used to, you aren't required.
Yeah, you're not given positive access to somebody else's body, sure.
Yeah.
But I think that I think that the violinist argument I think can be kind of used for rape, but I don't think it necessarily works for consensual sex if you know that's how kids are made.
Okay, well, I guess I can see it being a weaker argument. The other thing I want to ask you about was the what you just went over with the hydroencephaly thing and the like you said they're like less than human or whatever. I think one thing you kind of have to, when it comes to debating abortion, like I don't understand the problem with just admitting that. What's the problem with admitting that like you might be ending a life? I don't understand the apprehension in that level, because
killing babies.
I mean, maybe on like an optic level. But
yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Like, most people are going to have a revulsion to killing innocent babies.
I suppose so. Oh, well, that's kind of all I had.
Okay. Well, I love you. Be careful. You're essentially stating that withdrawing consent is not a thing. I mean, there are some points in life where withdrawing consent is not a thing, where you do have an obligation. One example of this might be, let's say that I'm Australian and I agree to drive somebody to the center of the country to go on some guided tour thing or something, and I agree to provide all the refreshments and all this other bullshit and I'll do work, whatever. Well, let's say that when we get to the center, let's say I'm actually like, you know what, actually I really don't feel like doing this. I'm going to drop your ass off here and I'm leaving. Fuck you. Like, I can't withdraw my consent from that. Once we've embarked on that journey together, like I have some obligation to the people that I'm with to see it through. You could argue maybe security services are the same. If I agree to be the bodyguard for somebody and like an hour in, I'm bored and I just leave, I can't withdraw my consent to do that job at that point. Like this, we had an agreement. Like it would be illegal. I would get charged, and it'd probably be immoral as well. It really depends on what we're talking about.
So what's up? Could I just get could you just try to give me like the one sentence rundown of your argument?
A person is the name given to the emergent conscious experience of the underlying physical structures of the brain, and that's the thing that we ought to protect. It's the person that we speak of. It's the thing that gets rights. Yeah.
So essentially you're grounding personhood with the mind. So I just have a few questions with that.
Okay.
So my first is just, is a being only valuable if they have a mind? As in like, is it a necessary condition for moral consideration?
Yes.
Okay. Would it be okay if I ran you through like a reductio or a hypothetical just to see like,
yep,
where this leads? Okay, for sure. So just one more follow-up question. I assume you would say we should extend no moral obligations to beings without a mind.
Correct.
Okay.
I would make it stronger. I would say we don't. I would say already that we don't. And then the example that I would go for there would be like people who are permanently comatose or corpses.
Yeah, or like brain dead people, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, one question pertaining to that. Like, I would agree that maybe that's the case, but to me, that just seems more like a descriptive claim of like societal norms, but not really like a normative commitment as to like how we should treat people without minds.
Well, I'd say we ought to as well, but I'm just, you said the statement of like, we shouldn't do a thing. I understand what you're saying. When I strengthened your ought claim, I just turned it into an is claim. So I would say that I would strengthen the ought claim, and then I would say that we already actually do the stronger ought claim. Sorry, yeah, you're right.
Okay, got it. No, that's cool. Okay, so essentially here's the reductio. Let's imagine a painter who works on houses.
Okay.
And one day while painting, he falls off his ladder and he hits his head. He suffers a brain injury that disable or like severs his thalamocortical connection. So he no longer has the capacity to deploy any sort of conscious experience. And let's say we're in the future, so we actually have the medical capacity to, restore his thalamocortical connection. Do you think that we have a medical obligation to restore his connection, or do all of our commitments to him end as soon as he loses the capacity to instantiate a mind?
I'm not sure. I would have to think about this a lot. Intuitively, I want to say yes, because then I would almost be treating now like a death state isn't really a death state. It's just a sleeping state. But if I think of a more intense, but one that doesn't actually, it's not physically equivalent. It just becomes consequentially equivalent because you have the ability basically to bring somebody back from the dead. And then I try to extend this theoretically into the future. What if we had the ability to resurrect somebody? Do you then also have an obligation to resurrect somebody, assuming it's not cost prohibitive or something? The counter to that would be that, well, when people died initially, they didn't know about the possibility of resurrection, so maybe you could argue that that wasn't on the table there.
Yeah, could I interject maybe?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So I'm pro-choice. I don't know if that's okay, but this is like a reductio that I faced a lot when I was, starting this thing, and it really challenged. I don't know if challenged my beliefs is the right way, because I have the same intuitions, but it definitely changed the way I debated. So one of the ways I've tried to combat this reductio is essentially.
So before you combat the reductio, I think it's an interesting question. Because if you have the ability to resurrect somebody and it's cost negligible, like it wouldn't cost like $1 trillion whatever dollars or whatever, right? Do you have some kind of moral obligation to resurrect that person, assuming you could do it, like you would provide any other life-saving healthcare? I think that's an interesting question. However, I would say that the only reason why we can even ask that question is because there's some sort of continuity argument. There was already a prior existing person that we could ask that question about. So even if I were to come down on either side of that hypothetical, if the anti-abortion person were to try to draw an equivalence between that and a fetus, then my counter retort would be, okay, well, if John fell off the ladder and we're talking about repairing John's brain, we're speaking of a person who existed, and we're talking about bringing this person back into existence. When it comes to the embryo or the fetus, which person are we saving by allowing them to continue their development? There's no person yet to even speak of. So if we were to revive John, it's out of respect for whatever moral consideration we would give to John having already been a person. To allow the fetus to develop wouldn't be analogous, and I would try to make it disanalogous by breaking it there and say the comparison doesn't work. That would be my response to it. Okay, go. You can tell me how you would do this.
Okay, no, that's fine. Let's just go with this. So yeah, I understand. So your symmetry breaker basically is just referring to the fact that one of them is already a person, one was never a person to begin with.
Yeah.
So that's fine. I actually think that's a super intuitive position. I think the only problem with that is that has to be more explicitly stated in your value criterion. Because when you say a person is someone with a mind, you need to specify it's someone
Well, I would say it's somebody who has the capacity to deploy a conscious experience. So I think the analogy I would run with here would be something similar to if you have a McDonald's and you go to McDonald's and it's open, that's cool. If you go to McDonald's and it's closed, it doesn't mean the McDonald's no longer exists. If you were to destroy the building, it'll be open again tomorrow. It has everything inside to remain in function as a McDonald's. There's something fundamentally different between a construction site that has a bunch of materials to build a McDonald's and a McDonald's that's just temporarily closed. I would say these in kind are different types of things. And then when it comes to the question about reviving John versus allowing I had another thing there. Never mind. Forget the other thing. Because that's the thing I was gonna go with. Yeah.
Okay, so I think one thing though is it can be a little tricky when you're for example with the McDonald's analogy, you have to be really careful, being super explicit about what you're specifically valuing. Is it that you value the actual brain parts that let you instantiate consciousness, or do you value consciousness itself? And that gets into some muddy waters because essentially, right, if you are oh, I value the consciousness itself, right? Then obviously you can't really run that.
Well, no, I would say the consciousness emerges from it. So for McDonald's, I value the ability to order a Big Mac and some fries. I value the meal that I get, but the meal can only emerge if the underlying structure is there to cook the food, right?
Yeah, for sure. So you're basically drawing a clear line between for example, a philosophical zombie who has all the relevant, brain parts there, but it's just not instantiating into any sort of meaningful conscious experience. They would be of no value to you because the thing you value is not the actual parts in place. It's the thing that those parts manifest.
Yeah, maybe. I'm really uncomfortable with the philosophical zombie, though, because it kind of ontologically breaks my understanding of where consciousness comes from, right?
Yeah, I
Like,
take
it
a
would be
similar
like
question. I'd
asking
say
me,
like,
like, do you think that torture would be ethical, like, if the other person was a masochist? And it's like, well, I mean, I guess, yeah, but like you're fundamentally changing that person's relationship with pain, much the same way that with a philosophical zombie, you're fundamentally changing the way that I would imagine consciousness emerges. So like, I mean, I would agree, but you've broken apart like a core definition, a core element of what I would say, constitutes a conscious experience, is having the underlying brain parts to deploy it.
Okay, here, one last thing. Okay, so here's another thing that I think can come up when you're drawing or when you're making the capacity argument, which is just like, it's kind of really easy for the pro-life person to like intuition pump a bunch. Yep. So like, for example, situations like in a vacuum, is it okay to do anything you want to a hydroanencephalic baby? Mm-hmm. So like, how do you plan to combat those kinds of reductios or hypotheticals?
I think Trent would be more likely to do that, but I don't think that, I don't know if Lila usually entertains those types, but I would probably, I could theoretically intuition pump a bunch of those things in return, right? Like given the opportunity to save 100 permanent like hydroencephal whatever babies versus like 5 real ones, are you saving the 100 or the 5? And then in what other circumstance would you ever make such a trade-off? Like I could spend more time thinking about it, but yeah, I would try to intuition pump other examples.
Okay, so I understand. So you're fine biting the bullet though, that like, yeah, in a vacuum, we can kind of do whatever we want because it's just not a person. We have no obligations.
Yeah, basically I would ask the same about a corpse, right? There might be things that we shouldn't do to corpses, but it's not because we treat the corpses as persons. It's just because we think it's gross to mess with.
Yeah, there's
corpses,
like instrumental wrongs.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, I think one argument though, like, for example, I don't know if this is like necessarily that convincing, but I would argue like the reason why like necrophilia, for example, is wrong is like not because we have any obligation to the deceased person, but because like, engaging in unconsensual intercourse with, dead bodies, like that becoming like a societally accepted standard could lead to like, people unconsensually engaging in intercourse with, non-deceased people. So like, what's to like prevent a different argument? Is it just that like the same thing wouldn't apply? It's just unrealistic that.
Well, I think there's actually a few ways you could run it down. One, the very first thing I would say is that I think there are several ways that the argument is an auto win. So the first thing I would say is whatever moral consideration we give to corpses comes from other alive people or previously alive people's thoughts and desires, and we don't treat it like a person. So, for instance, I don't think anybody would trade 100 corpses for one real person, right? You should never do that. I would hope not, because they're corpses. And then whatever value a corpse has, you could argue that a corpse has some value, but it comes from a previously alive person. And there's a big influence from other alive people to imagine that corpses will be treated valuable, right? Like if I'm in a society and I know I'm going to die and I've seen other people's corpses, I don't want my corpse to be fucked by some weirdo. So nobody should fuck corpses. But that's coming from my desire to have my own corpse, my estate in a way protected. You can also argue from a weird property rights thing, like, well, once you die, your next of kin possesses your corpse and so they can dictate the treatment of it or whatever.
But you don't think those same kind of like external value or arguments apply to the fetus? Like, what if someone made the argument that, well, there's a super strong pro-life coalition that, has an interest in the continuation of the fetus's life? Like, you don't think that argument would work?
No, because who are you continuing the existence of? Like, these people have no more buy-in anymore to abortion stuff because they're already adults, they're already alive.
What do you mean they have no more buy-in?
As in, I have a buy-in. If I don't want my corpse to be defiled, then I don't want corpses to be defiled. That would be a position that I would maybe even legislatively or legally force on other people. But to say like I have an investment in not having abortion happen anymore, why? You can't be aborted. You don't have the same stake in that, I think.
Oh, I guess okay, sorry. I was referring to like when people have an interest in others' corpses not being defiled, not like your own corpse, not like the personal property right, but just the thing is like, I have an interest.
Yeah, there's some property of the corpse you think is special. Yeah, I mean, people can argue that they might have that interest. If they wanted to shift to that, and they think that the interest, the corpse in and of itself has some value, then the point that I would harp on is whatever interest you might have in that corpse, or whatever moral value that corpse has, it's certainly in a completely different bucket or category than human life.
Yeah, well, that's certainly true for the corpse, but as for the fetus, right? Like, so, I mean, it's definitely easier to make the connection that the fetus has the same, like, for lack of a better word, like telos as like you or I do, right? Like with the corpse, the clear distinction is just the lack of life. But when the fetus is alive, which I'm pretty sure you concede, those kind of arguments that just talk about like the nature of the thing are a lot stronger.
That's fine, but the telos of a embryo or whatever is much different than the moral consideration given to a person, because the telos of a thing might be to eventually, like, how would we even define teleologically from start to finish like an embryo? First of all, what is the start? The start, we could argue it could come prior to conception. It was a separated thing between a sperm and egg. But let's say we grant that. Okay, fine. Well, the beginning of this is the egg. Well, what's the end? It's certainly not death. It would have to be the complete and total decomposition of the body, right?
Depends on how you're cashing out telos. If telos is like interest satisfaction, then it would just be like when there are no longer interests to the individual, or like when they're no longer capable of forming interests. But you could still make the argument that, prior to the capacity to form interests, there's some kind of, biological development to enable said thing, right? So that could all be bundled under telos, and that's a way that you could like exclude corpses but include the developing fetus.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just saying that you can have a telos for a thing, but I would argue that the moral consideration for said thing arises as part of personhood, which is like a component of the telos, not the entirety of the telos. And I think that cashes out when the person has to constantly say that there is a biological process happening, there's a development happening, because then I would point to the fact that, like, in no other part of any other thing ever, unless you can think of an example, does anybody ever use the development of a thing as having the equivalence to the thing itself. So when somebody says the development of a thing, I think they have to be careful, because I'm going to harp on that and say, oh, well, if you're saying that it's because it's developing a thing, then that means that it doesn't have the thing. So we can't point to the value of that thing necessarily. It's definitely not the same. You can try to say there might be some similarities or one thing leads to the next, but it's definitely not the same. And I would argue the moral consideration isn't there yet because the personhood hasn't arisen. And there's a bunch of other hypotheticals I think that I would tease that out on. For instance, if you were to arrest the development of a thing after personhood emerges, the conscious experience emerges, then I think we would all safely say, okay, well, you can't kill this thing. Like a super mentally retarded 5-year-old, you can't kill it. But if you were to arrest the development prior to the brain forming to have a conscious experience, I think way more people intuitively saying, oh, yeah, I guess, sure.
Yeah. Okay. One more kind of line of questioning. So we've already established that a mind is a necessary and sufficient condition for moral consideration. So my question is then just like continuity of consciousness, or like the quality of the mind in a sense. Does that allot one person more value? Like, for example, with someone who is like, a mentally retarded 5-year-old, would they have like less value to you and like some kind of trolley problem reductio than like, you or I, or someone who's like, not retarded?
Probably. The difference between a thing, I don't think necessarily speaks to the category of the thing itself. Like some chairs might be more comfortable than other chairs, but the most uncomfortable chair is still a chair and is treated as such. Same thing with humans. Some humans might be more valuable than other humans in a variety of different ways, but a human is still a human, or rather the mind is still a mind and still is granted all the moral considerations that any mind would be granted, even if you had to pick one or the other. Like, just because things have a moral equivalence doesn't mean that they would be ranked up the same value-wise if you had to pick between one or the other.
Yeah, so it's to say, like, there's almost a threshold at which point once you cross, like, there kind of is no way, or like, we basically, in practice, we wouldn't value some people over others, because like, once you cross that threshold, like, you have the right to life, essentially.
Kind of. I mean, we do. I mean, like in medical triage, if we only have so many medical supplies available, then you have to start making difficult choices. But like this is like a limitation problem. It's not like some people just don't have the right to life. It's like a limitation of resources or something, right?
And then how do you draw the distinction then between like these kinds of people and animals?
I just say human cash. I just do human. The only ontology that we can even hope to understand, and that's debatable, is a human mind. Just because the human mind is like our own, theoretically, you could be solipsistic if you want, but that's gay. But to pretend that you can speak confidently of what an animal mind is like, I don't think anybody can confidently assert that. Again, we can't even speak of other people's minds truly. So to say that we can speak of an animal mind, I think is not possible. But I don't know if Lila's going to want to do a vegan debate.
Yeah, I think my one response to that, though, is like, why can't we engage in some kind of like Pascalian-esque wager, right? Like, let's say that animals do, like, there's some epistemic ambiguity. So let's say animals do have, some kind of value rooted in a mind, then like, it seems like what we do to them is like, super duper immoral. I feel like there's some gray area though, like the probability versus impact ratio, I feel like is skewed in such a way that like, it seems like in some instances, it feels like you have to bite the bullet and at least extend some consideration to animals, but you don't.
I mean, it depends on how you want to go down that. What does the Pascalian wager mean? Because Pascal's wager implies some ultimate truthfulness at the end. It would be strange that the ultimate truth of the universe is that it's immoral to factory farm animals that also happen to taste really good to us, because one points to some objective moral fabric of the universe. But if there was one, man, what a horrible what a horrible thing. Like, most people should be disgusted by rape. Most people should be disgusted by murder. Intuitively, we've outlawed what we intuitively we all feel like these things are wrong, and then our laws reflected as such. It would be very strange if there was some morally real truth of the universe that also like intuitively feels completely the opposite to us. But you could also argue from an anti-realist perspective as well. But also, fuck,
Yeah,
I don't think Lila's going to
mean
argue for a vegan debate. So yeah.
fair enough. I don't mean Pascalian wager in the sense that like it's an ultimate truth that, you know, God exists or like something like that, and like that's what's grounding it. I just mean in the sense where like Pascal's wager is in like, you know, we can believe in God for the hope that, you know, we'll go to heaven or whatever, or something like that. In this, just in the sense that like the investment you make to like believe, or in this case, the analogy would be like to not consume animal products is like super minimal compared to like the potential impact.
Yeah, but potentially, I guess it just depends on how confident you are about us ever being able to know about an animal mind, or how confident somebody is that they would say that an animal mind is a mind like ours, I guess. So like if somebody's like, it's like 0.1%, then that wager is probably not very compelling. If somebody's like, it's like 50-50, well, then that wager becomes a lot more compelling, I think.
Mm-hmm. And you don't think the same kind of like epistemic ambiguity to the mind applies to the fetus? Like we can be confident that the fetus's mind is like different enough from ours not to be valuable?
I think based on everything that I've ever seen or heard of related to like neurodevelopmental research, yeah. But I, like, if it was the case, like I had a hypothetical for this, so I don't think it'll get that deep. But like if somebody could develop a pill, and when you take it, every experience you've ever had, every memory you've ever had comes to you, you're able to remember everything. If you took that pill and then you could remember being a single cell zygote, I might change my opinion completely on abortion. But if you took that pill and you have an awareness of like floating in the womb and you're at like 20 to 24 weeks or whatever, then I'd be like, oh yeah, fine. That's when your awareness starts. So it's whatever. Yeah. Now, obviously I don't know realistic if that could ever be developed, but yeah. And then I would ask my opponent, I guess the same. If you could remember everything you've ever experienced or had an experience of, if that memory were to start at 22 weeks versus the moment of conception, what would your feeling be on that? Would it change you or move the needle at all?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's some gray area though, because like at that point, would that even be valuable experience? Like floating around in the womb? Like I feel like you can even take a more hardline position and say like that's not even like a valuable kind of experience.
Well,
so, like, even
it's
if
a
that pill
mind
existed.
that's capable of like perceiving itself and having a human mind. I think you just kind of have to value all of those bucket wise. Like
yeah, I guess
threshold.
optics wise, like you might as well.
Well, even threshold, like who's to say what a valuable experience is or not? Like if you're a neat living at home, your mom's base. I understand this is infinitely more complex than just a fetal experience, but no, yeah, I would just say that you should bucket it differently. If somebody really wanted to get into it though, then it's possible that you maybe could bucket it differently and talk about it only because it's in conflict with the bodily autonomy rights of the mother. You're hitting on like one of the hardest things aside from like killing somebody, which is like inhabiting somebody's body for months and months at a time to survive. So maybe that crosses some threshold there, or it's not quite the threshold of like a human experience, but like something slightly less than that would come in conflict with the mom's bodily autonomy. Maybe.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what she'll be running? Like what kind of argument is she like? Is that publicly available?
I mean, I've watched all of her arguments. It's going to mostly be this weird right to life argument, the 14th Amendment, and then her trying to argue that like a zygote at the moment of conception is a zygote is a human or whatever because of DNA. But I think that there are several ways that this is not very compelling, but I don't see how she responds to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the best response to the human thing is just like the example of like, you know, brain dead people. Like it doesn't seem like we have any obligation to extend to brain dead people. And like, let's say we said that, you know, when like a doctor pulls the plug on a brain dead person, that's murder. Like that'd be super highly intuitive that like doctors, you know, are just like fulfilling their medical duty and pulling the plug. Like all of them would be murderers. That seems like really wrong.
Yeah, although her response to that would be, well, they have a fetus as a future like ours and the brain dead person doesn't. But then I go to the like the potentiality of a thing is not the same as a thing itself. If you want to give, and then I think you run into an issue because if you want to give moral consideration to the potentiality of a thing, then I don't understand how things like contraception don't count as murder. And I think you can use that same argument to discredit all of the like, well, this is a child of rape and he's alive and we're so happy that he's here today. Like, isn't it like good thing he wasn't aborted, right? Like, I don't know why you couldn't run that argument back, an hour before conception is go true. Also, good thing the mother was raped, right? Because if the mother wasn't raped, we wouldn't have this person either, right? I think this is an unsatisfying argument.
Well, I think there's a pretty good response to like, though, why aren't sperm valuable? Like, why is contraception not a moral wrong? I think it's just like, they would just argue that it's not a subject until conception, right? Like,
yeah, but I think subject highly implies personhood or mind, no?
No, not necessarily. Like, aren't animals subjects? and you wouldn't consider them persons.
I'm thinking subjective. When you say subject, what do you mean by subject? You mean like just a thing, like an object? You might be using subject philosophically correct, and I'm retarded. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. By subject, I mean technically, if you want to go into, I mean like numerically identical being, but essentially all I take subject to be is just like it's the same. Like for example, that fetus, like at the point of conception, certain traits of that being have been locked in a sense. So like we can basically like. And this kind of gets into like mereology, which is the debate's definitely not going to go there. But it's the same being, right? Like it has the same biological, almost like telos to it in a sense. But you don't even need to go there, right? You can just say like it's numerically identical in the sense that that fetus is the eventual person in a way that like the sperm and the egg don't necessarily constitute that like individual.
I don't understand though how, so there's several different ways that I would hit at this. So one would be, there'd be cute analogies. What do you do about like monozygotic twins? Can you explain teleologically, I guess, what happens when a single zygote divides and splits and two separate twins come from it? What happened? Did one person die and give birth to two people, or did one person split into two people, or what? Yeah, what does that mean? What's happening there?
Yeah, I think it would just be a single subject became two. And then each subject is like numerically distinct from the original, but the original was like a single whole, if that makes sense.
I don't know if she would go with that. The soul. So did God put two souls in the one zygote, or like I can't think of any other time in life or any other example of being able to split one person into two people.
I think the soul thing is good though.
Sure. Well, like why couldn't I just don't understand. So I want to say that like let's say I don't want to say like a zygote on its own won't develop into anything, right? Like it's a single fucking cell. I'm sure it has enough to split a few times, but it needs nutrients. It needs a ton of stuff from the mom. But why couldn't I say similarly to like a sperm and an egg? Like these things need to be brought together via sex, the same way that a zygote needs nutrients delivered via the mom's, whatever, the tube bullshit, the umbilical cord. What's like so fundamentally different here? Just the creation of the single cell zygote?
Well, I mean, if your argument is that like it's dependent on something external for like continued survival, then like that would apply to like newborn babies too. But I mean, maybe that's not what you're saying.
Well, no, because for the newborn baby thing, I can point to the newborn baby and just say that like that is a person. It's had personhood for at least a few months. But if you're arguing, not you, but like if the other person's arguing like, well, personhood's not what matters. It's the origination of this being. The being doesn't have any of the properties that we would care about, unless you're just saying that like the being existing itself is the thing we care about because it will develop into something else.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like the two ways to ground that are either telos, right? Like as a human, this thing has like some kind of rational disposition for development, right? So ending that would be like contrary to the human telos, right? Which like
can you talk to me? How do you bracket off the telos at death? Why does the telos end at death and not total body decomposition?
Oh, because okay, for sure. So like let me just pull up like some just basic account of like what human telos is, because essentially it'd be like all the things that are part of that would end at death. Like they would just be the natural end. But I'll pull it up.
Yeah, and then whatever you pull up, this is going to be my counter argument. Because the telos can be compelling if we believe in purposes or whatever designations for things, whatever bullshit. Which I don't, but whatever. But if I were to run it, if somebody would say, well, this is the telos of a human, this is how they're supposed to develop ontologically, this whatever, and I would say, okay, well, where does the telos of humans stop? Is it after the corpse decomposes? And they go, well, no, it stops at a point. The point is probably going to be my point of like when the brain ceases to function. I go, okay, well, why doesn't telos begin at that point then? Why would you end it at a point and begin it at a different point? Like it seems like there's different qualifiers for that. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the reason is because one of them is like biological telos, which is like some sort of like self-preservation or like growth that's like independent of a mind. So like that would obviously be present before the origination of a mind, but it would end at death.
When you say biological telos, what do you mean by that?
So it's biological telos, the intrinsic orientation of an organism toward maintaining, reproducing, and perfecting its own life form. So it says, in other words, it is what the body and its systems are for. So like essentially how we could cash this out in the abortion example, the embryo has a certain like essentially it requires nutrients, right, from the mother, but it's using the nutrients. It knows what to do with it to an extent. So basically it needs something to realize its telos, but that doesn't mean that it's not part of its telos, if that makes sense.
And then why can't I say the same, like a human being is the telos of an egg and a sperm, when these things are created explicitly and literally to utilize each other to create like a human that, whatever.
Yeah, so like you might be able to say that like the telos of the sperm is to like conjoin with an egg and vice versa with an egg. But the objection would be that a new subject is formed when the sperm and egg conjoin. So like it's a new subject, therefore it has new telos.
This is what I would think is the challenging part of the conversation for the other person. It's difficult to navigate for me though. But so the thing is the reason why we want to appeal to telos is because we're trying to escape a particular biological statement about a thing, and we're trying to point to like a broader overall like macro developmental perspective, I think. Would you agree with that? Like we don't want to say like this one cell has these parts. We want to say, well, no, on a broader level, this is how a thing develops, and this broad thing is like what we're protecting, right?
We're trying to protect like its purpose in a sense.
Yeah. The thing that I would say is what I would accuse the other person of is it feels like we would have to start playing a dangerous dance where I would say, well, the telos of a sperm or the telos of an egg is to combine with the other thing and then to create a human. And then they would want to move the argument to the biological perspective of like, well, no, hold on. The unique or individual subject might be created at conception. But then I would say, well, if we want to move to like a biological argument, then I feel like we're in a different realm than talking about the teleological arguments. That's what I would feel.
I think those two aren't distinguished like that. I think telos encompasses both rationality, like the pursuit of virtue, but also biological development. Because essentially like someone who like subscribes to this view would say that like telos is all encompassing of like what it is to be a human. And part of that is like biological development that's independent of a mind.
Yeah, but how could telos not include for the development of a human, say for divine conception, the introduction of a sperm to an egg?
Because before that, the telos you're talking about is not the telos of a human. It's the telos of a sperm or the telos of an egg.
Okay, and then what would prevent me from saying... Well, I understand that. What would prevent me from saying then, okay, well, I would say that the telos of a zygote is to become an embryo. The telos of an embryo is to become a fetus, and the telos of the fetus is to become a person. Why couldn't I bracket things off like that? Why couldn't I challenge the other person and say, you're using an arbitrary distinction, so I'll use an arbitrary distinction?
Well, I mean, they wouldn't, to them it's not arbitrary, right? It's like grounded in some sort of like metaphysical purpose. So you would have to like, they would probably just ask you for the justification as to why you're bracketing it off that way.
Yeah, but I feel like
right?
Their justifications aren't teleological. Their justifications become biological. Like, well, it happens to be that there's one zygote and it's like one cell of a thing. Like I would argue in some ways a zygote is more similar to an individual sperm or an egg than a zygote is to a trillion cell baby that comes out at the end of the day. Like, how would we bracket these off? Like, why would we say one is more similar to the other or the other is less similar to the other?
Yeah, that's a good point. So they would just have to make the subject distinction. They would say, like, regardless of the fact that, on like a cellular level, the zygote is more similar to a sperm and an egg than it is like the trillion cell baby. Purpose is beyond like biological characteristics in terms of form, right? Like it can like.
But then real quick, if it's beyond biological characteristics, how is it literally constrained to the moment of conception and not prior to the sperm and the egg?
Because it's just a different subject. Like that's like something metaphysical that's being indexed to a biological function. The same way you value the mind, right? It's like the same way you value brain parts because they instantiate the mind, right? You don't actually care about the brain parts, you care about the mind.
Yeah,
so it's like
but like you just
thing.
said, their thing is indexed to the subject, right? It's indexed to a biological function. I mean, mine is kind of as well, but the function is the communicating brain parts, right? So if they want to index it to the zygote, I would say, well, why can't I index it to the brain or the mind, right? How do we fight one over the other for that? Especially because I say your indexing stops at brain death, but your indexing starts at what I would argue is an arbitrarily earlier moment. My indexing stops at brain death, and it starts at the brain beginning. So how could they argue for their indexing over mine?
I mean, again, the argument would just be over like what's included under telos. If telos is only made up of things that originate from the mind, which is like definitely, which is going to be part of their thing. They're going to say that like rationality and whatever these kinds and like the pursuit of virtue are part of telos. Okay. The thing is just you're trying to exclude purely biological functions and they're trying to include purely biological functions. And the reason they're able to do that, and of the specific subject, right? So I think basically your 2 points of attack, which I think, is what you've been outlining, is like you either need to try to blur the distinction between the subject of the zygote and the sperm and the egg, or you need to just like make the argument that the valuable part of telos comes from the mind and not biological functions.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Nice talking to you.
I love you. Be careful.
I had this idea whilst watching. Have you seen the Dinesh D'Souza, Alex O'Connor debate?
No, I haven't.
You haven't? Okay. One, you should definitely watch that before you debate Dinesh. Very entertaining. Two, there's something that happens in it several times. I think it's a bit of a trap, and I think that you're accidentally falling into it as well. In the debate, they're debating the Bible. Alex's strongest points are all regarding the Old Testament, and Dinesh, throughout the course of this conversation, he will fight quite heavily on a lot of the New Testament things. He'll fight quite heavily on the Old Testament things that he likes, but he's willing to bite the bullet on a load of the Old Testament stuff that doesn't suit his way of thinking. And it's because he'll call it the Jewish Bible. It's a bit of a ploy they're playing. Where
how does he get around Jesus?
You can choose from the Bible.
When Jesus does a Sermon on the Mount, the Pharisees try to trap him, asking him if he is here to defy the law of Moses or whatever, and he says, "I'm not here to overturn the law. I'm here to fulfill the law." At least in Catholics, I've never been taught that the Old Testament is something to be forgotten or doesn't apply anymore. I've never heard that. Does he have a different?
Yeah. He will agree with all of that. And they just do this knowing wink and a nudge to their audience. They play these things off. A lot of these attacks that you will try to lay on somebody like Lila as well, in regards to the Old Testament, they'll be fine with it because they'll sort of slyly use that within their audience as an attack upon Jews. Quite simply, it's how Kanye believes that Jewish doctors are responsible for all the abortions. It's that kind of thing on black people. He says that Jews are aborting all the black babies.
I guess, but then I just ask: are there any passages in the New Testament that speak to abortion? And I don't think there are.
Yeah, probably not. But I'm just saying that I think this is a trap that they're playing, and people keep falling into it. Okay. And it's somewhere they're going to wriggle around you for sure.
Sure. I don't think the Bible arguments will come up much, but I'll keep it in mind.
Okay, good luck, man.
All right, love you, babe.
For Baby Jaxon, right? You have a good response, I think, but that's not the purpose that the Baby Jaxon serves. The purpose to bringing him up is to say that there was this little baby boy who was very happy, who had happy parents, and so on. So your response should not just be say that he had no brain was good to kill, but to have a bullet for her to bite. That lady who was dead but had to be kept alive because she was pregnant.
Sure.
Something like that, right?
Yeah, sure. Or that if parents, I feel like the obvious, maybe I'd have to work it into a better thing or whatever, but I feel like the obvious answer would be if a couple wants to conceive because they really want to have a family, then they conceive and they find out their baby is going to be a Jaxon baby. Are you telling me that you would force that family basically to never have another kid? Because they would have to have that child. It would be full-time care, and they never have a normal, happy, healthy family because they're forced now to take care of the child with no brain. I feel like that would be the bullet I would make her bite on that.
But I think the strength of her argument is that the Jaxon thing is a real thing. It's not hypothetical. You need to get those real examples.
He should have been really aborted, right?
Yeah. But the examples that you need to have for her as well should also be real people.
Sure, but I don't understand how the lady in Texas has anything to do with necessarily the Jaxon example.
No, it's not a straight up response. It's just that at some point in the argument, you need to bring it to a real bullet like that to bite.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Okay.
That's number one. And number two, if we value not just the body, but the mind, what if we scan the mind we scan a brain with a computer and have a simulation of the brain with a mind in it, right? Do we value that? Do we give that moral value?
I don't know. That's a huge metaphysical question that's beyond us right now.
I think
that's
runs
at least ChatGPT 7.0.
With ChatGPT, it's a bit different because it's a totally different thing. But if we have a human mind that we scan, that's a brain, right?
Sure.
And then I think it runs into sort of a contradiction between your moral intuitions. Because let's say we have two minds that we scan and we make them interact in a virtual world. Well, we're E33, right? We're with a painting example. And there your intuition is that we have no moral value for those minds.
Sure.
And I probably agree because if you have 1,000 of them in a box and you say, I'm going to rape your family if you don't let me keep this box running, right? 1,000 people is not worth 1,000 virtual people is not worth one real one.
Sure. I have no answer. It would break a lot of. Yeah, it would just be impossible. I have no idea. Yeah. It would be like discovering alien. It completely breaks our philosophical mold of the world. It's like trying to contemplate. Well, not
but I think.
But I seriously doubt she'll go in that direction. That's a really.
From her point of view, that's a very easy example to answer. Right? She says we value human bodies. We don't value that, whatever that thing is.
Well, but we don't value human bodies because once a body is dead, the corpse, she doesn't treat it like a human, right? Or person.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, whatever the soul is, I don't know what her answer would be. Just something to think about.
Okay.
That's it.
I love you.
Bye.
So I was looking at Lila Rose's viewpoints and how fucking stupid they are.
Okay.
One of the things she believes is that using contraception causes divorce. That's fucking like where's the source of that though?
I watched a video she did with some crazy lady, Dr. Janet Smith. She's got a lot of dumb views on, obviously, all of these people do on like contraception and shit. And I've got a lot of big research that I'll probably read through these either today or tomorrow, just so I can like making contraception and abortion and everything available to people seems to increase like all the health outcomes, happiness outcomes, like all the other outcomes are increased like pretty substantially. Yeah, I don't.
The other thing I believe she said that also is using hormonal birth control is massively unhealthy.
Yeah.
Is there? Does she have like data for that though, or is she just like pulling?
That's just
like,
it's the MAGA conservative popular, and it's really the evangelical populist talking point. Basically, if you fuck with your hormones as a woman, it's evil, but they don't want to say it's evil, so they just say that like birth control makes you crazy or all that. That one weird Lindy Lee chick, the like the 31-year-old Asian girl who switched from being a DNC operative to now being like fucking epic centrist or whatever. She says that like she was mind controlled by birth control for 10 years or whatever. Like they just have birth control is just like a magical. It's like the anti-ivermectin to them. That like as soon as a woman takes a birth control pill, it turns her into this like satanic, evil, sex-having monster that is completely and totally unhappy with all of life and wants to murder babies. It's just it's a retard position that's not backed by data anywhere.
So do you believe that all these people that in general that are pro-lifers, do you think they only give a fuck up until it's a fetus, and then it's kind of just like fuck you, you've been born, now you're gonna pay taxes?
No, that's a common talking point by a lot of left-leaning people that want to epically own them, but almost every one of these big pro-life conservative people will super bite bullets on providing more funding to the family, providing more funding for child health care and all of that. Like they'll immediately bite those bullets and they'll look good in front of their audience doing it. So I never hit on that. You almost all of those conservatives will massively support some type of like early childhood family funding.
Cutting costs to healthcare and stuff, isn't that like an anti-pro-life stance to take though? Like
potentially, but you're going to get lost in the weeds
Medicaid?
arguing on fact there, because they're going to argue that like, well, they didn't cut it from families, they just cut it from lazy people, and then you're going to get like lost descriptively in terms of what's happening. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I thank you for giving me some time, but like I hope you wipe the floor with Lila Rose. You probably will, but like I'll be watching that, so I definitely look forward to seeing that on YouTube wherever you're going to have it. Okay. But good luck to you, Destiny.
Thanks. I love you. Be careful.
I wanted to ask you some questions about the consequence of your view. I think Lila would probably try to do something like that. So if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, right. So according to you, if I remember correctly, we should care about beings insofar as they have past or present experience, right?
I don't usually use the continuity thing much at all, but yeah. I guess,
okay.
I guess you could, but like there are weird edge hypotheticals to test that. Like, what if you completely replaced a person's mind between A and B? Could you kill them in between that time? And but I don't know. I don't usually use continuity of existence.
Yeah, no. I mean, I guess one thing, future like ours, that's a big argument from the pro-abortion, from the pro-life people.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think there's intrinsic value in future people? Because like, what if you had a button that spawns like very happy people?
What kind of intrinsic value?
Intrinsic just means like valuable in its own, not insofar as it like achieves something else, like valuable for its own sake.
If those people are brought into existence, they have value, sure.
Right, okay. But you wouldn't say, like, if I remember correctly, I think it was on Team Pool, someone asked you like, oh, if a woman did meth, would that be wrong according to you while she's pregnant? And you said yes, because it will bring about a human that it will be fucked because of that, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, how can one say, if we had a button and it's your choice to press it or not, if you don't press it, nothing happens. Still seems like we are obligated to press that button if it like spawns 1 million happy people. Or, like if someone told me, oh, I could have made the world.
Why would you be obligated to bring more happy people into existence?
You're just passing on like the opportunity to create just 1 million happy people. The world would be much better, no?
Well, making the world better isn't the same as an individual thing of moral consideration, right? Like, I think it's a different type of, I don't think it's necessarily related here. Whether or not it would make the world better, or whether or not you have like an obligation to the currently existing people or whatever, like it would be an argument about the preferences of the currently existing people, not future peoples that don't exist yet.
What about stuff like, I don't really care about that, but I assume I've had abortion debates where that was brought up. What about like stuff like the continuity of the human race, right? If you don't necessarily care about future people or something, what if it's like the last person on Earth and a woman can choose to have an abortion or not? Is that permissible then to just end the human species if she chooses to have an abortion there.
I mean, you can have that argument, but it has nothing to do with like the whether or not the fetus is alive or not, right? Because you could mandate all sorts of stuff at that point, like bisexual girlfriends or breeding tubes or whatever, like, or IVF. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Okay, and last thing before I go, she thinks life begins in conception, and then you're a person. You're so much valuable. Oh my God, so awesome. Right, and you said, oh well, based on this logic, it's entailed that we should register them in the population, give them citizenship. If they die, we should count that as a murder. We should investigate women with miscarriages. But according to your standards, like when they gain consciousness, that's around like 16 to 24 weeks. Do you think, if we have a pregnancy that's above like 25 weeks, we should count that as another person in the population? If she has a miscarriage, we should count that as like a death in our records. And if she has a miscarriage or an abortion, we should count that as murder, count that in the homicide rate and whatnot. Is that a bullet you're biting?
I mean, I could, yeah. It would just depend on I think very conveniently my thing lines up with like every fetus is viable, I think, at like 30, or I think every fetus is viable basically now at like 22 to 23 weeks. So you could basically deliver all of them anyway. So assuming the fetus isn't like fucked developmentally or there's like it's going to die, then I would have no problem biting them all. Yeah, sure, we should deliver all of these or whatever, yeah.
I will say on this point, if someone brings up a point like that, I will say one of the most crucial differences is not even abortions per se. It's IVF. According to them, IVF is like huge numbers of murders because that's like a lot of fertilized eggs that don't make it and only one makes it, but it's still fertilized. So if your standard is like 25 weeks and so on, then IVF is not something that's counted as homicide according to you, but it is homicide under them. So that's like a big reductio that applies to them and not to you, even if you think the population registry and whatnot is uncomfortable and you have to bite it. Sure. So that's like one, if it ever happens that you need to concede that, highlight the fact that IVF is still like genocide under them.
So I wanted to clarify your position. If zygotes were persons at the moment of conception, would you just be pro-life?
Yeah, probably. I think you'd have to be.
Okay. So I want to give you a hypothetical. Let's say person A shoots person B, and person B will die unless he gets a blood transfer from person A. Would you say that person A should be obligated to give person B their blood?
I feel like morally, I would say yes. Legally, there might be reasons why that I'm not aware of right now why you'd say no, but legally, I almost wouldn't be opposed to that. I think I'd be like on the fence for that one.
Okay, yeah, because I'm just thinking that if you weren't to bite the blood on that, then you'd have to say that, a person who would murder somebody has less duty to their victim than a mother does to a zygote or a fetus.
Person who murders their victim would have less of an obligation to them than a mother does to their zygote.
If you took
to that position or what?
The pro-life position would be committed to that because they're saying a mother has to go through with pregnancy, but it's not necessarily clear if a person who would murder somebody would have to give up their blood to save them. And that's not really, a precedent we have in law.
Oh.
That I'm aware of.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Okay. I like that one. That's cute.
And that's more on the bodily autonomy side of things. Yeah, so let's say I have a magic wand. If I tap somebody with it, it'll simulate all of the physical aspects of pregnancy without actually creating fetus or zygote. Would it be justified to kill that person in self-defense if that was the only way to prevent them from tapping you with the wand?
Yes, I would say absolutely, yeah.
Okay. If somebody takes a pro-life position then, if we say that that's the sort of thing that would warrant lethal self-defense, then we're saying that the fetus has sufficient moral worth to subject a woman to that sort of experience. The sort that we would normally say justifies lethal self-defense.
Sure. So I understand that argument. So I feel like mens rea, or I feel like state of mind, in the worst cases, it won't matter. But I think that there is a Venn diagram, there's like a middle group of cases where it does matter. So let's say hypothetically, there was a 4-year-old pedaling some kind of bike vehicle that was going to run you over, and the only way to stop it was to push a button and blow up the bike vehicle, okay? Whether it's an adult, whether it's a 10-year-old, whether it's a 2-year-old, you're going to be killed or like seriously maimed, I think that you can argue, even with a lack of agency or criminal intent or malicious intent on the part of the operator, you are allowed to defend yourself there, right? Now, I think there's a category of actions where, let's say that a person, let's say you're even in your home and a person comes up and they're like, I'm gonna punch you, I'm gonna hit you, okay? Let's say you see an adult coming up to you and he's like, I'm gonna punch you, and he walks up to you and you see him coming. I think if it's an adult, they know what they're doing. They can understand you saying, hey, like, I don't want you in my house. I don't want you to come and hit me or whatever. And they're walking up to you. I think you have a right to lethal self-defense there. I think that if it's like a 4 or 5-year-old like playing and they're like in a game and they think they can run at people's houses and hit them, I don't know if you necessarily would have the same right there to lethal self-defense, even if you were made to suffer the hit, because it wouldn't be maiming, it wouldn't kill you, anything like that. I think that there's a group of people who don't have necessarily the capacity for the mens rea, for the criminal intent, for the super malicious intent to do a thing, that you wouldn't have that same right to lethal self-defense for if the non-developed people were doing something that would kill you, or if more developed people were doing something that wouldn't kill you but know better. And I think that the argument for pregnancy is like in that bucket, to where I use the word inconvenience, and I know it triggers the fuck out of women or people that argue this thing, but like generally speaking, pregnancy is a very large inconvenience, but it's generally speaking, it shouldn't be life-threatening. And the baby is not making the choice. They don't have the agency to maliciously attack your body, right? Such that like if it was an adult or somebody that knew better that could tap the magic wand on you, absolutely you could kill that person. But if somebody who doesn't know, they don't have the agency to do that, and in a way you're like, I think for rape, it might get harder to argue this, but like at least for ordinary sex, there's the possibility of conceiving a child. I think it becomes harder if you grant that that's like a life, that like, well, I can lethally defend myself against a situation that I knew was possible of occurring when there's a person who doesn't know better,
Yeah, I get what you're saying. You're distinguishing between an innocent aggressor and like a villainous aggressor.
Correct. There are types of actions an innocent aggressor can be killed for, but there are types of actions that the malicious aggressor could be killed for, but I think the innocent aggressor maybe couldn't be killed for. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So let's go with this hypothetical. Let's say somebody drugs another person such that that other person can't be considered to be in the right mind to commit certain actions. And let's say they're about to kill another person.
Sure.
Is it justified to kill that drugged person in self-defense?
Yeah, always, because even if they're the innocent aggressor, if it's going to be like killing the other person, then yeah, you're always justified. Yeah, killing or maiming or something.
Okay, so let's say it's not killing. Let's say it's like something like serious or substantial bodily injury.
Then I think you still could. Then the argument for pregnancy, personally, I don't know, there's a trigger. I don't know if it would count as serious or substantial. Maybe it would.
Yeah, so
I don't know. I'd have to think.
I think it could be argued that it is, because there's protracted and obvious disfigurement.
For 9 months.
Which is
it's a long time, yeah.
Yeah, for 9 months.
Like somebody put the thing in chat yesterday, like if pregnancy were 9 years, like intuitively my position almost 180s to where I think the bodily autonomy self-defense argument actually is totally valid. 9 years, I think, is a lot different. 9 months is a long time. If it was 9 days, would you agree that the intuition flips where it's like, okay, well, you could do a thing for 9 days, right? Rather than killing a baby.
It's kind of, yeah, like there's some gray area there where like it's not clear. I do think that 9 months is on the other end of that. Like it's a pretty long time with this sort of injury, especially if it's something that we would normally say that you could kill in self-defense if that were to happen to you. And I would say that it's furtherly overdetermined because the fetus has less consciousness than like a normal person, right?
I don't generally do the like different stages of consciousness. I think you kind of have to binary that one. Otherwise, you get kind of weird. Like, as a person who's severely inebriated, is that person less conscious than an ordinary one? I don't know what the names are, but I think you'd give it a different phenomenon to describe it. I don't know if I'd say I'm less conscious. Like, if I'm waking up in the morning or sleeping, I don't know if I'd say that person's less conscious. They're just, like, in a different state of awareness or something, but...
Yeah, well, if we were to use, like, animals as an example, like, maybe they'd be at, like, rabbit level, but they're not having these complex thoughts that... normal humans are.
I feel like the conscious experience thing, I don't know if I would tie it to like cognitive stuff, like how complex your thoughts are. I think it has to be a general awareness or experience.
Yeah, I would say even that, because their brains aren't as developed in those areas. Because like, the womb is a very like low oxygen atmosphere.
Is it?
I'm pretty sure.
They must get all the oxygen they need through the umbilical cord now.
To survive, but I don't know if it's enough for like complex brain activity that would generate like a normal like human conscious experience.
Possibly. I mean, I would assume it's 20 to 24 weeks because the parts are there, but I mean, it's hard for me to say, obviously. I don't remember being a
I think
embryo or
yeah.
fetus.
But yeah, I would just say that I think the bodily autonomy arguments get a little bit overlooked in
Sure.
favor of the personhood arguments. And I agree that personhood is like when value begins, but it's not clear that even if there is value and they're a person, that supersedes the woman's bodily autonomy concerns.
Yeah, I mean, you can fight on the personhood thing. You're just starting. You can fight on the bodily autonomy thing. I just think you're starting from really far behind intuitively there, and then you have to build out. You have to do a lot of work, and you could stumble in a lot of places. I feel like the personhood one is more intuitively sensible, and it's easy to defend. But yeah, I mean, it is possible. Like, I'm sure the bodily autonomy thing might come up a bit, and I feel comfortable that I can navigate that realm. But it is much harder.
Yeah, and I would also say, have you read Judith Jarvis Thompson's paper, A Defense of Abortion?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so just the people seed stuff.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. Which is why I don't like the term, one guy tried to use that against me, the consent argument. I don't know if I would use consent if I would exchange that with the word or use that equally as the word like aware of a possibility of. I think that's a very dangerous equating of those two things, because to say that like I park my car in a dangerous neighborhood, I'm aware that it could be broken into, but I certainly don't consent to it. And I think Judith's argument in her paper was like, if you put up every screen you could, but a person seed floats in and lands on your couch and a person starts growing, you have an obligation to house and everything. And it's like, well, did you consent to it when you're doing everything you could to block it? I don't know if I would say that that's necessarily the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that. It's kind of begging the question what the pro-life position does sometimes, because they're arguing that that you're consenting to remain pregnant if you get pregnant. So I agree that when you have sex, you're consenting to a risk of becoming pregnant, but that's not the same thing as consenting to remain pregnant.
Sure.
And give birth. So they're kind of smuggling that in. Like, if you consent to the risk of becoming pregnant by engaging in sex, that you're somehow implicitly consenting to the further commitment of remaining pregnant.
Yeah, sure. Although she would argue that if you consent to one, you necessarily ought to consent to the other. Have you ever read, there was a response paper that I read that moved me a lot off of the Judith paper. I wish I could remember. I don't even know what school this guy read to. I don't think he was a PhD or anything, but it was, it made this argument called, have you ever heard of this concept of like de facto guardianship?
Something like that. Can you explain that?
So basically the argument was, this is the one I kind of rolled with against Matthew Dillahunty. Basically, the argument for de facto guardianship is that if an agent is in a place and the agent is like healthy, so the person who could choose otherwise, and somehow through chance, misfortune, whatever, another person winds up in their care, and without having to make a significant sacrifice, on their own, like to die or something, right? Does this person have a moral and then potentially later on a legal responsibility to take care of that person? I feel like morally, I think almost all of us would say yes. I think legally, I think we can get close to it. I think that is a hard one to fight against. The hypothetical I think the author gave in that paper is, suppose there's a really bad snowstorm. A person wakes up and they see there's a horrible snowstorm and they're barricaded in their home for 6 months. People know that they're barricaded in there, but they can't go in and they get the person. The person wakes up and not only are they barricaded in their home for 6 months, they also see they have an annoying fucking baby there. But they're given 6 months of food and supplies and baby formula and everything else, and they can feed the baby if they want, if they choose to. It's going to be annoying. They're going to spend hours doing it, but they could do it, right? Let's say that at the end of the 6 months, the snow thaws, media, police, everybody's knocking on the door. They knock on the door, and the person opens the door, and they're like, oh my God, you're here, you're alive. And the guy says, yes, I'm great. And they go, where's the baby? And they go, oh, I just let it die. I didn't want to feed it. I think almost everybody would say that like a moral crime has been committed there. And then the question is like, do you extrapolate that to legal stuff? What would your argument be against that concept of like de facto guardianship?
I agree with that sort of de facto guardianship. When it comes to resources, we already have that sort of in law. Like you can't be a negligent parent. You have to feed your kids and all that. But let's say we take away the formula or whatever, and let's say that it's a woman who has breast milk. Should she be required legally to allow the child to, get milk from her breast?
So I think if you change it to that, I think people would still even say maybe yes. But if we want to intuition pump it a little on the woman's side, well, what if we say the woman had to provide breast milk, but the child was also her own child? I think we would still say, that de facto guardianship would apply there, right?
Yeah, and I guess that's the question of what are like the limits of that de facto guardianship, because
Yeah, because the limit start to test basically is like how inconvenient is the pregnancy, how much of a bodily harm is the pregnancy versus the being that's inflicting it, right? Is the question, yeah.
But I think also how consistent is it with our other legal precedents? Because in other contexts, that would be considered, sexual assault close to rape outside of like because, with kids, we sort of have this intuition that getting breast milk is this normal thing. But if you remove that, let's say it's a grown man who needs the breast milk, then I think our intuitions change a little bit.
Do they? I'm thinking they probably would. Would they?
Yeah.
If there was
At
a
least
woman and a
it's
man
less
that were stuck
clear.
in some place, and let's assume for health reasons, the woman is plenty healthy, and the only way the woman could feed the man was through breast milk, but the woman says no. Does the man have a right to the woman's breast milk? We really do draw, it really sucks. Women kind of got fucked on this. We really do have a special delineation in society between stuff that comes from our body or that permits people to take things from our body or enter our body. That is like a pretty special category of things that we generally would just don't ever allow. But children get kind of a pass on this. And then women are the sole things that are capable of providing this. So one, as a man, I have obviously nothing morally or legally at stake. And then two, for a frame of reference, I don't even have like a true like personal experience buy-in. Yeah, that's a rough one. Sorry, I got it.
I think there's like a little bit of a conflation between like our moral intuitions about what the woman should do and then our moral intuitions about legally what we should force the woman to do.
For sure.
I feel like sometimes those things are a little bit too entangled because like, of course I have the intuition that the woman, of course, should give her breast milk to save anybody's life. But then legally, I feel like that's a totally different question of should we be like forcing her to do that?
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. The only thing is, in society, the reason why it feels really bad to do this is because there are other ways to feed the baby. Either somebody else could feed the baby or the baby could be fed with formula. In a society where there wasn't enough food for the baby or the woman had to breastfeed, I don't know if our legal intuitions would change or not. I'm not sure. There's just really nothing comparable to children, so it's hard to say. Yeah,
like I don't know how that would work before we created formula and other like things for babies to have. Yeah, I just think those are some things to think about on the bodily autonomy side of things.
Yeah, I think that I feel comfortable enough pushing. I feel like I could argue this side well enough. I think I could also do like a few callers ago, the Pascalian wager, to where on the personhood argument, I feel like I can argue it well enough that at the very least, the other side must contend that there is a legitimate difference of opinion here. And so to march from the personhood argument to these obligations that a woman would have to provide her body, if there are legitimate disagreements as to the personhood of like a single cell zygote, and you're going to compel from somebody what truly is like arguably the highest form of compulsion. Like I think you could make the argument that it's dramatic that like, but it's even a higher form of compulsion than conscription, because in conscription you're not guaranteed to ever get shot or die. If you're delivering a child, you're guaranteed to have 9 months of, body morphing and all that, whatever other bullshit. That truly is that's a very tall order to force somebody to, if there's legitimate disagreement as to the personhood even of the fetus initially.
Yeah, and if you wanted to put it in like a legal context, I think there's a pretty strong argument that at minimum it would constitute substantial bodily injury in like a legal context.
It's just hard to do. When a thing is designed for the thing, it's hard to, the substantial bodily injury is it's such a normatively loaded thing. Like if for two gay dudes or whatever, even for a man or a woman, like would we say like anal sex is like a substantial injury? Like it's a lot more injurious, I don't know if it's a real word, than like vaginal sex or whatever else, or jerking off or whatever. But like we wouldn't necessarily, well, I guess asses aren't even made for sex.
Well, it wouldn't
It's
be
kind of
substantial because there's like certain criteria. Like there's like tiers of injury. And like once we get to like substantial and serious, we're talking about like more serious things.
Yeah, but because like a womb, not to lean on the naturalistic thing, but like I mean it is like you have babies in there and then they come out of there. Like what would we consider that a substantial serious injury? Like what criteria are we using here that makes it count as a substantial serious injury?
Yeah, there's like specific criteria. Let me.
Sure. Well, no, I'm not worried. I'm not interested in like the American Medical Association. I'm just like in your mind, like what is?
Yeah. Just the sorts of things that would significantly impact your life from like an injurious perspective. Like,
okay, so like mobility restrictions, dietary restrictions, arguably, behavior restrictions. Like there's different things that you can or cannot do now. Like increased health complications in the future, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like before we agreed that it was the sort of injuries that you could do lethal self-defense for. So I think we have the intuition that they're pretty severe, at least in some respects.
Sure. I do agree. I generally don't fall on the bodily autonomy side, but like not falling on that, like it would be as close as you could get to justifying lethal self-defense against even an innocent aggressor. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I thought about maybe it would cross the line. But yeah, I mean, I do agree. It seems hard to imagine that in any other circumstance, it's hard to imagine almost any 9-month wound that wouldn't qualify as a serious injury for a man or a woman. But
yeah, exactly. And I think pairing the bodily autonomy with the personhood arguments would be even stronger, because you could argue something like these are all of the bodily autonomy infringements, and it's for something that either isn't a person or only has some sort of minimal consciousness.
Sure.
So it kind of over-determines those arguments.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's pretty much all I had.
Okay. I love you. Be careful.
But yeah, hope you do well. Yeah, see you.
One, I'm a biochemist, so I'm going to come from it from a biological angle. So what I want to bring up is, so I've watched some of your previous debates before, like your first debate with Lila. And even now, a lot of it hinges on, like, they're part of the human species. And also, you get pushback in terms of, like, your line is arbitrary. Of, like, I think you go with viability, and it's viable between 20 and 24 weeks.
Wait,
like,
do you think I
sort
go
of
with
like your cutoff
viability?
line. I believe so, yeah.
No, I go with the human mind, the mind guy.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But you put it as like the window of 18 to 24 weeks.
Well, that's because that's when all the parts of the brain are there and communicating, not necessarily. Now, that's also the point of viability now, too, 22 to 23 weeks, but just that it's more the brain thing than the viability thing. They just happen to line up right now.
Yeah, exactly. And from what I've seen from your previous debates, it's like one of the talking points that gets put forth is like, well, that's sort of arbitrary. And it's like, it's also like a gray window. What I would want you to bring up, at least for me personally, is like they bring up that human life starts at conception or fertilization. And I would encourage you of like, that line there is also arbitrary. Of fertilization is not a lightning strike. I would encourage you to look into, there's a process, and I'd be curious to know in terms of like, can they actually put a line, as in there's membrane fusion, actual DNA coming together. There's a whole process there. And basically, there's an arbitrary line that they're designating there. It's fertilization is not just a lightning strike. And so I'd be curious to know if there's a birth control that, let's say, prevents membrane fusion, would they be okay with that? If there is a birth control that prevents actually, basically the DNA aggregating together and actually, forming a nucleus, et cetera, would they be okay with that? Although I would expect that they would actually know about fertilization. They just know that it happens. But I just want you to be aware that fertilization is a process, and whatever line that they're using is an arbitrary line as well, just as arbitrary as yours, I would say. Is that track?
Mine is not arbitrary, but okay, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm using their language. I agree with you.
No, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Actually, that's a really good argument. I'll fish with that one and see what I got.
Also, they also bring up that, well, since it's DNA and it's human DNA, okay, and that it's unique, I would also potentially bring up, a cancer cell and a tumor. Is that now a new person?
Cancer cell and the tumor, I'll avoid those because I think that they go with they'll go with the purpose arguments or the telos or the ordinary development arguments. Some people wanted me to float this idea of like, I forget the name of it. There's like a partial molar pregnancy or something that can happen, and like cancer cells could theoretically spread through the body, and it's like, are parts of the baby's soul like going through your body? Like, I think they would just argue that like this is not like an ordinary developed human. It won't develop into a human. It's a different thing. The more interesting question to me there is the monozygotic, the identical twin argument. Like, is a person dying and then two are being born if it ends up splitting and you get twins in that way? Or like explain that process? Because I feel like that's a little bit difficult to address from the you are a human at the very moment of conception thing. That seems really weird to me. I don't know how because we have no other versions of humans splitting into two and becoming two humans.
Yes, I don't disagree with you. And also what I would bring up is, and this might be sort of like an optics thing. So I think it's fair to say, as far as I can tell, Lila is religious, and a lot of pro-lifers are religious, and they're relying heavily on biology. I'd be curious if you want to, if they're accepting biology, I would encourage you to ask them if they accept evolution, because if they do, then I think that opens up a whole new window, at least for me personally, where if they're accepting presumably evolution, or then we evolve, we have common ancestors. I'd be curious to know, at what point did God start putting in the soul into the human species? And also, at some point, if humans are still evolving, then at some point, God is no longer putting souls into whatever the next evolution is. And I also point out as well that
so this would be a question like, basically the question, this would be like summarized neatly in like, did Neanderthals have souls?
Yes, or if at some point we can resurrect Neanderthals, can we just willy-nilly kill them? We do whatever we want.
And then also like there's some percentage of like, because Neanderthals were mating with, or were Neanderthals
yes, they were interbreeding.
Yeah, yes. whatever the next thing was. Yeah, was that considered like a half human, or were soulless beings mating with soul beings? And yeah, sure, okay.
Exactly. And also what I would bring up in terms of technology is, okay, they also hinge on this unique DNA aspect. Okay, if or when, 50, 100 years from now, okay, genetic engineering is widespread. Okay, well, one, does a parent need consent to genetically engineer their child? And two, if they genetically engineer it to the same DNA as the parent, can you then just abort it?
I feel like they would use the Telos argument there as well. Like, it might be, when they say unique DNA, they mean a unique organism with a unique blueprint that's developing on its own, much the same way that they would say two twins, even if they both have the same DNA, are technically unique DNA, a unique species or something like that. I understand what you're saying, though, yeah.
And when it comes to the brain transplant thing, I think there's an example that you can bring up that, I don't think we should tie it to the biology, even though I'm a biologist or biochemist.
Actually, wait, hold on, wait, I'm sorry. Hold on. If you took an egg from your mom that was frozen, and you did a sperm thing, it still wouldn't create the same DNA, right? No, it wouldn't. Okay, no. Never mind. Okay.
That's why I bring up the genetic engineering technology.
Yeah,
because they're making, in my opinion, a species argument of like, yeah, we're humans because of the DNA, but keep in mind that there's no reference DNA template for humans.
Sure.
Okay, like we evolved. And then what I would bring up in terms of, this whole brain transplant thing of like not tying to biology, I would maybe, it might be a little bit silly, but bring up the movie Avatar. Are the humans the villains in Avatar, as in, were they justified in wiping out Jake Sully and all the other Na'vi just because the consciousness was transferred? That's the whole point of Avatar, right? So are they no longer villains in that scenario?
Gotcha, yeah. I would venture away from that just because I feel like they would come back with like vegan arguments, and then I'd be in a weird spot. So, but I understand.
I know you hate the veganism and abortion debate, understandably, because I think there's some overlap there. And then with that whole species thing, okay, where and I would encourage you to look up, let's say, the biological species concept. A part of it built into it is producing viable offspring. Okay. And since they rely on biology so much, okay, so then they have to accept evolution, and they also have to accept the biological species concept. And built into that is viable offspring. And by that definition alone, presumably there's an argument to be made. I would not make it, but that opens the door of like people with Down syndrome are not potentially part of the human species. And so then is it okay to abort them?
Oh shit, wait, hold on. Definition, human species. How the fuck is that defined? What does that even mean to define it?
Just look at the biological species concept. But pretty much interbreeding, and you can produce viable offspring.
Oh, wait. Wait, what does that mean, that like ligers or whatever aren't considered a species, or?
Yeah, they're a hybrid, I believe. Or like a chimera.
But can't they not produce offspring? Or am I making that up?
Yeah, they cannot produce viable offspring.
So are they...
Now whether they're actually fully classified as... But they're like a dead end type of thing. Just like, and also, I believe, I remember correctly, it's not all individuals with Down syndrome are infertile, but I believe it's largely the females are infertile, and the males generally struggle with fertility.
The biological species concept defines species members populations that actually or potentially interbreed in nature, not according to similarity of appearance, although appearance is helpful to identify. Okay. Okay. So, wait. So I don't understand why... Oh, wait, is a liger a different species than like a tiger and a lion or whatever?
By that definition alone, I think yes.
Is
liger... I think they just put him as...
Is liger a species? Well, because you're trying to... Oh, shit. No, a liger is not a species. It is a hybrid animal resulting from the crossbreeding of a male lion and a female tiger. A key reason ligers are not a species is because that male ligers are stale, meaning they cannot reproduce. Wait, what is... What is Homo sapien? Is that like a family or species, or what the fuck are we?
Well, I believe it's currently like Homo sapiens sapiens, but like defining species is like that's a problem. Like
Sure.
biology hasn't solved like how to define all species. I can say that. Like
Okay,
I was just looking into the
genus,
biological species problem.
Homo species, Homo sapiens. Okay. So Down syndrome people are what? They're not. They get kicked out. They're rejects.
Well, I wouldn't reject them, but if they're relying on biology, which I don't think they ultimately want to, because otherwise they have to accept evolution, and most religious people would not. And two, it's like there might be that opens the door of like if you're not producing viable offspring, or if you're a human that can't produce viable offspring, like an individual with Down syndrome, like you're ejected from the species.
Is Down
You're
syndrome
also like
considered part of human species. Hold on, go ahead.
And also like. Going back to this, relying on DNA, like, well, it's trisomy 21. And so it's like they literally have extra chromosomes. So it's like, well, if you're relying on DNA, they have an extra chromosome. They don't qualify.
Oh, fuck. I think I stumbled onto the woke Google bot. Yes, Down syndrome is considered a part of the human species as it is a genetic condition that occurs in all human populations. It is a natural variation. Down syndrome is not an illness, but a genetic condition that results in a different developmental outcome due to the extra chromosome. Okay, that's a take.
Well, exactly, but that's why if they're like referring to like there's some ideal human DNA, okay, of like reference material, then individuals. That's okay. Go for it.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry, keep saying what you're doing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. By that criteria, individuals with Down syndrome don't meet that criteria because like they literally have an extra chromosome, and there's a whole bunch of other genetic abnormalities with individuals with Down syndrome.
Okay.
And then also what I would potentially bring up on this aspect of evolution, like again, at some point there's going to be the next stage of evolution. So like if or when a woman becomes pregnant and through genetic screening or whatnot, it is determined that this is like not part of the human species. Can you abort it at that case? I don't because that it will happen on a long enough timeline.
Sure.
And then one of the other things that I'll bring up is in one of the in-person events that you had with it was I think the very tall guy on the on-campus event, and he brought up it's like when you consent to sex, then you're consenting to the consequences of having sex, which is like, becoming pregnant, having a baby. In my opinion, I think the best analogy to deal with that argument is driving a car and obeying traffic laws. As in, if someone is driving a car and they're obeying all traffic laws, but they happen to hit a child, the child just runs in front of the car, and they run it over and kill it, should they be charged with murder? Because by their logic, if you're getting into a car, you're consenting, even though you abide by all traffic laws. Okay, you have every intention of not hitting a child. Okay, but if you do, that should be murder, presumably.
I understand what you're saying there. I feel like I'd rather just draw the distinction between consent and acknowledging the possibility of. I feel like the break-in argument works a lot better that because there are so many ways that people would argue that you're driving above the speed limit or something. Like you could construct the hypothetical in such a way that like a child crawls into the street with camouflage on or something. But I feel like the idea of like if you park your car and you go inside, if somebody were to ask you, is there some percentage chance that your car is getting broken into? You must say yes. It's impossible your car would never get broken into. But just because you acknowledge there's a possibility of your car getting broken into doesn't mean you're consenting to it. Like acknowledging the possibility of a thing,
agree.
especially when you're taking active steps against it, is not. I don't think that's. I think it's an abuse. I think it's intuition pumping the word consent there. Yeah.
No, I agree with you that they're loading consent there. It's just like, and I agree with your example. Like, ultimately, I agree that your example deals with that argument. I just think that at least for the general public, they're more able to conceptualize like, well, driving a car and hitting a child, and like the concept of like most people don't want to be charged with murder, actual murder, if they.
Yeah, well, but I feel like in that example, if somebody was like, I think abortion is wrong because when you have sex, you acknowledge there could be a kid, and if I come out with like, oh, so if I run over a kid in the street and I didn't even mean to, should I be charged? Like people would say, yeah, of course. I feel like I'm intuition loading against me and trying to fight back on that one.
Well, I'm not saying maybe not hitting a child, but like but despite you obeying all traffic laws, that's where it's like, you have every intention. That's where it's like, I agree with you that someone, let's say, using birth control and taking out protective measures, it's like they have every intention of not becoming pregnant, and like that should be honored. But yeah, I take your point.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, maybe my example might not be the best. But yeah, pretty much my main point is if you receive pushback on like your arbitrary line of like consciousness at 18 to 24 weeks, I do want you, at least personally, like recognize that their line is arbitrary and that fertilization is not a lightning strike. It is a process.
Conception is also like gestation. Like if I were to say gestation, they would say, well, when is gestation? And they would act like conception is like the microsecond the sperm touches the egg, the zygote is fully formed and all the internal diffusion membranes, the combination of everything else. But in reality, this is a process as well. And then to break that apart, if you were to disrupt this at what point, when would it be considered?
Exactly.
Yeah. Because I'm trying to think arguably, oh my God. Oh fuck! That example, because she likes to play with words so much, and she wants to say at the moment of conception, it counts as a child. But when people talk about conceiving a child, what are they actually talking about?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, they're talking about
it's not
fucking.
a lightning strike.
They're talking about they're talking about having sex. So if oh shit, okay, yeah, we'll lean on that one. I got that. Okay, anything else?
And then when it comes to, let's say, so also one of the, I think, arguments that gets put forth, and I think I've heard maybe Lila Rose use it, is like part of it is like the zygote, since they consider it a person, it has, the right to, your uterus and all that stuff, and like to implant into your, I'm curious, like, I don't know if you know, based off of your previous like debates, is like, our pro-life advocates generally, I assume, they're generally not okay with let's say, a type of contraception, or I guess it's not technically contraception, but basically a medication that results in the zygote being pretty much ejected from the uterus.
Yeah, preventing implantation. Yeah.
Yeah, preventing implantation. I assume they're not okay with that. But then I'd be curious. I'd be curious to know, and whether you want to use it or not. I guess everything's up to you. But like, let's say, okay, the zygote is implanted into the uterus. Okay. And then like the person, doesn't want the pregnancy, but then, they're going to, kill two birds with one stone. And it's like, well, they're just going to have a hysterectomy and just remove the uterus. And so it's still technically implanted. Is that okay in their world?
I feel like they would say that counts as murder the same way that like if you were to start mass drinking alcohol or something, you're basically having a more complicated version of an abortion, no?
Well, in the end, yes, but that's where it's like, do you not have the right to remove your own uterus as well?
Well, they probably easily say no, because they're also saying the woman doesn't have the right to her body, basically, right?
Well, yeah, and I guess maybe, I know you're not in favor of the bodily autonomy argument, but that's where I think most people would recognize that, I think that you can remove, or they can more easily conceptualize, removing the uterus. And you're not really disrupting the implantation process. I can still hypothetically, still go through some stages, however limited, through development, but it's it's more or less just like a relocation type of event, as opposed to like an abortion, right? And then whatever happens, happens. Because a lot of the moral loading that gets put into it is they describe abortion of you have to go in and destroy all the body parts and all that stuff, but one, that represents a minor amount of abortions, and two, there are many ways to terminate a pregnancy, and one of them might be just I'll just remove the uterus, and that's it. And that's, let's say, quote unquote, a non-violent way of aborting it or terminating it.
Okay.
And you might be able to use that potentially. I think that's most of I think that's pretty much just about everything that I had on my mind. But yeah, main points is fertilization is a process. There's no reference genetic material. I would get them to accept evolution. If they do, then at some point the human soul was not there, and then at some point when we become a new species, well, is it going to still be there? I think that's about it on my end.
Cool. All
cool.
Right.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, I love you. Be careful.
So the thing I keep thinking about is, was it worth it to be happy for a little bit? Even though it ended up sad? Or would it have been better if the whole thing never happened?